Hello, my friends, Evolutionary Energy Arts family. So, guys, have you seen this yet? Yellowstone supervolcano's latest. It's rated as a high risk in the new USGS report. And so, what has changed? Well, we've been watching it. You guys have been watching it. I've been watching it. We've seen a lot of activity, especially with the geysers, that's been unusual. And so now it's been assessed as a high risk in a new assessment that was published by the USGS. And so obviously we know Yellowstone is the big one. This is the big one. And when we talk about volcanic risks to the whole planet, really, as it is a super volcano. And so in the new rankings, it's actually ranked 21st out of 161 volcanoes that were assessed. And in total, the U.S. has seen 120 eruptions and 52 episodes of notable volcanic unrest at 44 volcanoes since 1980, according to the USGS. The assessment classed 18 as very high, 39 as high, 49 as a moderate threat, 34 as a low threat, and 21 as a very low threat. Yellowstone's given an overall threat assessment score of 115 compared to Hawaii's Kilauea at the top of the list with 263. And so Yellowstone last erupted 664,000 years ago. Scientists are monitoring it constantly. The last three eruptions have taken place every 6 to 700,000 years, so we are right in the middle of that number, with the most recent happening 664,000 years ago, leading some scientists to speculate another could be due. And so in March, the geyser Steamboat erupted for the first time since 2014. But the USGS has said hydrothermal changes in Yellowstone's geysers are not linked to any volcanic activity at Yellowstone itself. Nevertheless, were Yellowstone to blow, the result would be a worldwide catastrophe, as this is just a super volcano, truly. As we can see, these are the different eruptions. So we're talking about the three different last eruptions. And you can see that even the smallest one, basically covered a lot of states. As you see the different ones, and the largest one extended all the way down into Louisiana and Texas and Missouri and all the way on up into Minnesota and Canada, of course, Montana, Idaho, Nevada, California. All of the Four Corners area was, basically buried under ash, as well as a large part of the Ozarks. So this is huge. And if you look at Mount St. Helens ash over here, it's minuscule in comparison. So Yellowstone is obviously the big one. And if we see here, this would be the initial kill zone with an eruption. And then you have your hot ash zone, which would extend through basically half of Nevada, half of Oregon, all of Idaho, all of Montana, Wyoming, most of Colorado, and over into Kansas and Nebraska, the Dakotas, Missouri, it goes on. So, and then we'd still have raining ash all through here. So this is huge. And then of course we'd end up with basically like a nuclear winter in the northern hemisphere. So yeah, if Yellowstone goes, really the best place to be is probably Australia or South America, Africa, obviously New Zealand. So very, very important volcano to keep an eye on. As we see, the caldera has moved over time in basically a east-northeasterly direction. And these things do move. So when we look at the 20 most dangerous volcanoes in the U.S., we're going on down. And, some of these are going to be very, very familiar and some of them not as much. Iliamna volcano in Alaska, Mount Okmuk in Alaska. Alaska is very, very active, obviously. Now, the Long Valley caldera in California, Crater Lake in Oregon, Mauna Loa in Hawaii. And Mauna Loa, I've been looking at it ever since Kilauea has erupted, and even just about a week ago, there were basically earthquakes going on that could be indicative of magma flow, because they were anywhere from just a few thousand feet above sea level, all the way up to about 9,000 feet above sea level. And so Mauna Loa is about 13,000 feet high, and it is something most definitely to watch. Glacier Peak, Washington, Mount Baker, Washington, Newberry Volcano, Oregon, Augustine Volcano, Alaska, Lassen Volcanic Center in California, Mount Spur, Alaska, Makushan Volcano, Alaska, Akutan Island in Alaska, Three Sisters in Oregon, Mount Hood in Oregon, Mount Shasta in California, and boy, there's some great stories about Mount Shasta. Redoubt Volcano in Alaska, Mount Rainier, obviously a big one there, Mount St. Helens, which we know about and has erupted in some of our lifetimes, and Kilauea, which is basically taking a break, or is it? So over here we have eruptive events detected at Semi-Sopochnoi, and alert level raised to orange, and this is up in Alaska. And we've seen an awful lot of volcanic activity going on, and it's increasing. And again, we're in that time frame where all the planets are basically on one side of the sun, which does seem to produce more volcanic and also volcanic events as well as earthquakes. And so if we look at volcano discovery today, very, very busy out there, and there's some new activity which we are seeing. Karymsky over here in Russia is showing potential, and been active. We have all the usual ones which have been going off and erupting for so long, and then we have the one in Iceland which is so incredibly difficult to pronounce. Erejokukul is probably the best I'm going to get, or the closest I'm going to get to it. And this one would be definitely an uptick in the activity if it were to go, because it could produce a V5 event and be a little bit more disruptive and increase the cooling of the planet for sure. As we see, there's a lot of activity going on right now, a lot. It's just been increasing as we're going. These are all in eruption. And we have some with minor activity as well. And as this article is saying, Hawaii houses 2 of the 18 U.S. volcanoes that have been classified as a very high threat, as we know of with Mauna Loa and Kilauea. And Mount Etna is sliding into the sea, and history shows that that could be catastrophic. And we've been talking about this, and there are prophecies regarding Mount Etna with Edgar Cayce as well, and it's a fact that it is slowly sliding into the sea. And of course, we've seen tsunamis in this past year now that obviously are terrifying and destructive. And this would be something that would be horrible, because this could trigger a massive tsunami that would devastate the whole region around the eastern Mediterranean. And Etna obviously is a big and heavy volcano, and gravity is pulling it down. And it's not the only one that we have to worry about as well. Obviously the Helena slump in Hawaii, and many have showed very, very deep levels of concern for that one, because that one in the past has basically caused a tsunami around the entire Ring of Fire, and that's very scary. And then, of course, over in the Atlantic as well, we have threats over there in the Canary Island area. And we were looking at this last week, and so that massive cloud forming over one of Mars' biggest volcanoes, they're now saying is actually icy water vapor and not an eruption. So this week, the European Space Agency released a curious photo captured by the Mars Express orbiter of a 930-mile-long cloud formation spilling out of a massive 12-mile-high Arsia Mons volcano on Mars, a phenomenon that's been observed for weeks straight. It certainly gave every superficial appearance that the volcano was about to blow, though that would be curious as the estimated date of its last eruption was about 50 million years ago. Turns out there's a much simpler explanation, according to the New York Times article here. It's called orographic lifting. That's when the wind hitting a massive structure such as a mountain, Arsia Mons in this case, is forced upwards, cooling and expanding due to lower atmospheric pressure. As a result, water vapor contained within can condense and freeze into clouds. And so that's what they're basically saying that this is, and it's not a volcanic eruption. Do we believe them? Not necessarily. But we will take it with a grain of salt as we do everything that officially comes out. And we have a strong and shallow 6.3 earthquake under the Drake Passage. This is right at the very tip of South America. And we also have a 6.1 up in El Salvador, just off the coast of El Salvador. And if we take a quick peek, let's see what else has popped out recently. There, as you can see, there's still a lot of activity going on over in Greece. We see some off the coast of Turkey as well. Still shaking from that big one. And this is the 6.1 over off the coast of El Salvador, and the 6.3 down by the Drake Passage. We also have over here 5.0 by the Sandwich Islands, and a smaller 4.6 over that way. Let's just take a peek and see if there's anything of note in Hawaii. These all probably are going to be above sea level. Barely. Well, that one is not. So, and that's over at Leilani Estates, which, as we know, there was a lot of activity over there. So we will still keep an eye and look for signs of awakening again. And we have a 4.0 over here off the coast of Vancouver again, as we were watching that. And a couple over in the New Madrid area to keep an eye on. 5.5 off in Japan. And a 5.0 off of Vanuatu. And another 5.0. And so, after months of drought, they have left the Rhine River and the Danube River at record lows, revealing bombs, gold coins, and other treasures from the past. I wonder if people are out there just gathering up gold off of the riverbed. You could pan for gold around here as well. It's interesting to see the signs over here, but this is a different type of gold here. So a lot of relics from the past are being exposed right now. And as it says, the docks are eerily quiet at Cologne's main port on the mighty Rhine River, with hundreds of containers piling up and awaiting their journey north on one of Europe's busiest commercial arteries. Months of scarce rainfall and hot sunny weather has driven water levels on the Rhine to record low, forcing ship operators to suspend services to keep vessels from running aground. We haven't had any new ships in Cologne since last week. They stopped in Duisburg, 80 kilometers north. So this is disrupting the flow of goods up and down the river. As you can see, it's pretty damn dry. And, you know, the craziness, the extremes that we've seen. Bicycles and bombs resurface. They definitely have to be careful in their cleanups there as well. World War II relics. Extreme warmth across the Balkan Peninsula peaks today. And then we saw that there's going to be a big change coming in after that. And also we have very strong tornadoes in Italy, and that's, here in late autumn. Now, when it comes to flooding preparation, from what we've seen with the last two hurricanes that came by, Charlotte appears to be the model. Charlotte's doing pretty well. And, some of the things they've actually done is actually bought out homes that they knew were in floodplains that were going to be an issue. And that's pretty smart, because we've been talking about, there's going to be some areas where it's going to be almost, not feasible to have people living anymore. So Charlotte, North Carolina is doing a really good job with addressing that concerns. And so, as it says here, the first step was to buy out homes that were in the floodplains in areas that were prone to flooding, because they're right by the rivers that Tim Troutman with the county says are meant to flood. We expect them to get out of their creek banks. The problem is that we have put up homes and businesses in those areas that are meant to store floodwater. With federal grants from FEMA and funding from the county and city, Charlotte started a home buyout program. Since 1999, the program has bought out more than 400 homes in the floodplains and demolished them. Altogether, the buyout program cost more than $71 million, but the buyouts have saved $27 million in property damage, according to the county. During Hurricane Florence alone, the program saved $1.9 million. So buying out houses and knocking them down isn't sustainable long term, and while the county was organizing buyouts, it realized it needed more accurate flood maps. On top of a bridge over Little Hope Creek is one of several dozen flood sensors that are placed in rivers across the county. John Wendell with the County Stormwater Services describes how the sensor works. To see what this does, it sends a beam down into the water so it knows the distance between the sensor and the water. All those sensors make up FINS, or Flood Information and Notification System. They track flooding in real time. Once the water gets up so high that it's going to breach and go over the road, then the fire department gets notified. It's like a smoke alarm, but for rivers. And while the immediate emergency notification is useful for first responders, it hasn't solved a bigger issue Charlotte was facing: outdated maps. Most states use the flood maps FEMA provides, but in the 1990s, North Carolina, a lot of those maps hadn't been updated since the 1970s. FEMA just didn't have enough money to update all the flood maps across the country all the time, the county said. So local government set aside a couple $1 million to map flooding. That included a new process called Future Conditions Floodplain Mapping. That takes land development use into consideration and helps determine how cities can best position themselves to avoid damage from flooding. To accurately map flooding, the state partnered with FEMA and the USGS. And the program in Charlotte was getting off the ground when another hurricane hit in '99, Hurricane Floyd. At that time, I was the planning administrator for the state budget office, and one of the things in the planning section that I had underneath me was Geographic Information Systems, said John Dorman, director of the North Carolina Flood Mapping Program. So he took the FINS idea statewide, where it's called FIMAN, and he used his political experience to get North Carolina General Assembly on board with tracking rivers in real time and making future conditions floodplain maps for the state. But in most states, it's still hard to get legislatures to budget for such an expensive service, especially when they don't currently have anything like it. Most still rely on old maps. That's why other states have partnered with North Carolina to develop similar programs, like Alabama and Florida. Even more states have talked to experts on flood mapping in North Carolina to boost their own programs. To Dorman, it's clear North Carolina is a great example for the rest of the country in flood mapping and efforts to decrease damage from flooding. I think this is the best practice in the nation, Dorman said of Charlotte. And so that's the type of thing we have to do now, and be very, very, very proactive, and divert some money from other things, because it's pretty obvious. Can we not see what's going on here? This can save lives. This could definitely save lives, and we've seen so many people swept away. this year in floods that could have been prevented. And here, over in England, BBC News, they're going to actually use these cute little guys, these beavers, to stop flooding. Beavers are being introduced into Gloucestershire in the hope that their dams will help prevent flooding in some villages. These animals tirelessly create natural upstream dams and now are being provided with penthouse accommodations. It's hoped that by helping them, they might assist with their natural abilities. Pretty interesting, and that's a way to utilize the gifts that Mother Nature has given us. And so, big questions. What do we do when the internet goes down? What do we do when the grid goes down? What do we do when we lose power and we're cut off from each other and there's no cell phone towers anywhere? Well, a beginner's guide to amateur ham radio for preppers. And there's a lot to ham radio. And honestly, I haven't looked into it in depth too much, but I think it's a smart thing to look into, and it is something that is definitely on my to-do list, and I will be moving forward with that as well. Because really, honestly, what are we going to do when everything else is down? And it will be down at some point. We know that. We could see that from the disasters. And, it's true. Ham radio does seem complicated, technical, and expensive. And, a lot of that is very, very true and justified. It's interesting that you do need a license for it. And you're going to need some time to actually study and take a test, as far as if you're going to broadcast. So you can buy one and start listening in. But if you're going to broadcast out, then you are going to need a license, and you're going to have to, take a little schooling here. So there's different types of radios and frequencies, and the FCC has basically governed this. So we have amateur ham radio, we have citizens bands, CBs, which used to be really popular back in the 70s and 80s. We have what's called Family Radio Service, FRS, General Mobile Radio Service, GMRS, and Multi-Use Radio Service, MERS. So what makes them different? The government will specify things like the amount of power that can be used to transmit a signal, restrictions on equipment and antennas, whether you can use repeaters, available frequencies, and so on. And so amateur ham radio, basically you're 1.8 to 1300 megahertz with gaps in between. It's by far the widest range of frequency operations. So amateur radio does not mean any broadcast radio used by civilians. In this case, amateur means non-commercial, so you can't use it to make money. Even a non-profit radio station would be considered commercial because it's broadcast to the general, it's to the general public for the general public's benefit rather than communication from one person to another. Some will refer to other types, CB, FRS, etc., as personal radio to distinguish it from amateur radio. The spiritual difference is that amateur radio is non-commercial but still powerful and broad, where personal radio is specifically meant for families on a hike or truckers stuck in traffic. Base stations can legally be up to 1500 watts. A typical handheld ham radio is 5 to 8 watts. There are fewer restrictions, if at all, on antenna, etc. CB, that's 26 to 27 megahertz. 11 meter band, 40 channels. It's been around a long time. It was popular in the 70s, fallen out of favor in recent years, though it's still used by truckers and off-roading clubs. It's unreliable, it's crowded, language can get pretty vulgar. You do not need a license to operate a CB. Power is limited to 4 watts, even though that's more power than MERS and FRS. CB has lower quality because of interference from nearby channels, e.g. baby monitors. And it relies on AM technology instead of FM. There are ways you could tweak CB to be better, but we think that's too complicated for most people. CB also requires a much larger antenna because of the longer wavelength compared to VHF and UHF. Then you have family radio service versus general mobile radio service. These are technically two different radio types, but they overlap on almost all the same frequencies and can talk to each other in most of the frequencies. And in 2017, the FCC changed the rules so that they became even more similar. Because of this, the popular radios sold in this category can usually do both FRS and GMRS. The FRS block was proposed by Radio Shack Store in the 90s so families could quickly buy and use walkie-talkies that were better for personal use than CB, but didn't require a license. This led to the growth of the common bubble pack paired radios you find in gas stations and Walmart. GMRS is a kind of sort of the business equivalent to FRS. For example, farmers and businesses with employees spread around a small area would use GMRS. You still need a license to operate GMRS, which costs around $85, but there's no test involved. GMRS could operate with up to 50 watts of power, although most products are still in the 3 to 5 watt range. GMRS is the only radio option other than ham that allows radio repeaters. Then you have multi-use radio service, or MURS. That was created in 2000, not very popular, generally not seen in prepping. You do not need a license to operate MURS. Power is limited to 2 watts, although some recent products marketed towards preppers are built on MURS in the background, like the GoTenna device that pairs with your phone to send short text messages without a cell network. It transmits over MURS to other nearby GoTennas, creating a peer-to-peer radio network. So ham radio is the best choice for preppers. And basically it's because of signal range in a variety of practical situations. How, there's things to consider here, how easy it is to learn and to use. Can you listen to emergency broadcasts? Can you communicate with emergency services? Overall cost to be properly prepared. What kind of equipment is available and does it fit well into emergency needs? How easy is it to modify and repair in normal life and emergency? So, you get more out of the ham radio, although you do basically have to go ahead and, according to the FCC rules, you need to get licensed if you're going to transmit. Again, you could basically listen in without getting licensed. And as this says here, ham is the only option where you can listen and talk to your local emergency services. Ham has a much wider range of frequencies than the others. CBs can get quite crowded, for example, since everything happens between 26 and 27 megahertz, very small range. Ham has better range. There's some nuance to this. Ham can use high-frequency bands, which are the best bands in a major SHTF emergency, because it can reach hundreds of miles without depending on anything or anyone else. And it has more power. Other forms are limited to half to 4 watts. Handheld ham units are typically 5 to 8 watts, and base stations can get up to 1,500 watts. So it gets into a lot more details, and I'll have the link for you guys as always. And so this has come up a lot more in discussions because it does feel like we're much, much closer to big events that could possibly leave us, kind of in the dark. And that really is a scary proposition. Remember when just YouTube went down? That was major panic for so many people when there still were other viable options out there, and we still had the internet, but we just lost YouTube, and it felt like, oh my God, I'm so disconnected. So can you imagine when we do lose everything? How that will feel, especially if it lasts for a period of days or weeks or longer. So it's something to think about what happens when we go beyond that. And then, of course, we could get into the whole EMF thing and keeping it in a Faraday cage and hoping others are doing the same as well. So my friends, as always, please do thumbs up to support the channel. Subscribe if you haven't joined the family yet, and click the bell so you get all the notifications. Share with as many people as possible so we can wake them up. And as always, my friends, may you be blessed with abundant peace, love, happiness, health, and always prepared in these times and kept safe. God bless and namaste.